Evangelical writer Joshua Harris kisses marriage goodbye. Next on Jinka Jabo. So, if you're new here, maybe you haven't noticed, but I talk a lot about religion, and I am very interested in the church and evangelical Christianity and Eastern religions as well. And this is a long-standing interest. Even though I didn't study religion in college, it was something that I've always been interested in. And it's something that I've always sought as I've gone to churches and temples and mosques around the world. I remember in the early 2000s when I started college, the evangelical culture, this new identity, this new type of Christian that sort of formed. And one of the most important books was I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris. And this was part of the milieu. It's also like Blue Like Jazz, which I never read. That was the other big one. And Sufjan Stevens, the indie singer, who incidentally, I just heard that he released an LGBT Pride album, which is very odd because he was the musician that a lot of my Christian friends, evangelical friends, listened to and followed, because it was like the indie Christian music. It was different than so-called Christian rock, which had gotten really bad at that point. Anyway, that's where Joshua Harris and his work was freely talked about and discussed when I was in college. I guess I Kissed Dating Goodbye was in 1997, and it was in his early 20s when he wrote it. And it's really the book that's responsible for purity culture as we see it now. And it's odd that with his divorce that he's going through at this moment, he is rejecting so much of what he taught. So I read his book when I was in college, and I thought it was a bit cynical. And I read the follow-up too, Boy Meets Girl. Boy Meets Girl was even better, because it goes a little further into his odd perspective. But to give you a rundown, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Joshua Harris, as a born-again Christian in his teens or 20s, I forget exactly how it all happened, he decided that dating and courtship as he knew it was wrong, and that he would take a biblical view, and that instead of dating, we should be looking for spouses. And this was the manual for a lot of my Christian friends in college, the people that I would associate with, I'd go to Bible study with. They all lived by this book, and it was a real cock block for a lot of us. Not to get dirty on you or anything, but it's sort of that manual, that purity manual that everyone would read, and they'd say, all right, that's it, no choice, have to stay a virgin until marriage. That's the only way it has to be. There is only value in becoming a husband or wife if you're still a virgin. And he harps on this over and over and over again. And while it is something that's sprinkled throughout the Bible, needless to say, there is a lot of talk about virginity as well as other certain things related to women's purity and all of that. There's also the story of Rahab the harlot, who ends up being one of the most virtuous women in the Bible, and the adulteress that they were going to stone to death, and Jesus says, walk away and forgive. And so just like in the Passion of the Christ, again, that was one of those things that was big in the early 2000s, that was everywhere in evangelical culture, that focused way too much on violence, and his book focused way too much on purity. Now the odd thing is, in the sequel, which I thought was even better because it goes even more personal, he talks about how this woman that he's been pursuing, and that he talks about in great detail in I Kissed Dating Goodbye, like the courtship and following her and everything. He talks about very personal details about their relationship, and how she confesses to him that she lost her virginity at the age of 14 and had several sexual partners. And so she breaks down crying when she tells him. There's this whole scene where they're having dinner, and he thinks about it, and he decides, no, that's not going to bother me. I'm going to marry her anyway. I'm going to be the virtuous person here. Jesus can forgive her sin. I can forgive her sin, all of that. And by that point, by the time he released that book, the first book that he wrote was a sensation, and he made lots of money. And he became a pastor, and that pretty much set him up for life. So he was sort of stuck in this way of thinking anyhow, and it was very marketable for him. It was very profitable. And so he's just been doing this for many, many years. And gosh, this was in 1997, so it's been 20 years that he's been living on this thing. When I was in college, I wrote a Christian column, I guess. It was called Shadowgraphs. That was back in the days of print media. And every now and then I daydream of like having this great idea and writing a book like this and getting really big, but that's sort of a misplaced interest. And reading this story, you know, I feel sad about what happened, but it also is kind of a glaring reminder of how we shouldn't buy religion from anyone. And this is, you know, I could sort of predict this happening, almost reading Boy Meets Girl. I remember reading that, and I read it like a long time ago, more than 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago or something. I read it in the library, and I was just enchanted. I thought it was so much better than the first book, but I also thought, you know what, for someone who's so hung up on this point, for someone who's so interested in virginity as if it's some magical, special thing, why would he marry someone who, you know, even by the standards of someone like me, seemed a bit slutty in her early years? I mean, if that matters to you so much, why are you doing that? Or was that just to give his book more propulsion? Or now, 20-some years later, is he thinking, oh, I wish I had had more fun when I was younger. Why did I give myself to just one woman? That's the problem with selling religion, and that's why you can't trust these idiots. And I don't know. I still feel sorry for him, and just thinking about his books takes me back. And now it's sort of like I was reading Boy Meets Girl online, and it's just even better because there's some snarky chicken cross the road, Hakuna Matata stuff going on in those pages when I read them now. Over and out.